Hello and welcome to History Human, and today we're going to be talking about the Liverpool to Manchester Railway, which, to use a very anachronistic term, took railways out of beta. It set the standard for how we build railways, what type of trains we use, and most importantly, it was the first ever railway to connect two major cities and use double tracks. So ladies and gentlemen, today we'll be discussing the Liverpool to Manchester Railway. Okay, so in and around 1825, Manchester and Liverpool were major industrial centres. Liverpool was a major port where raw materials came into the country and finished goods came out. Those raw materials were taken along to Manchester, also known at the time as Cottonopolis because of its massive cotton industry, to be made into finished goods, put back on the canals, taken to Liverpool, and then shipped off to the rest of the world. The two cities generally had a symbiotic relationship connected by the canals. And although the canals at the time were the most efficient way of getting things from point A to point B, they had several drawbacks. First being that they were very slow. The speed limit on the canals today is 6 miles an hour, and back then most boats were horse-drawn. When I say horse-drawn, they were drawn along the canal by land horses on the towpaths and not by seahorses. Sorry, I had to make that joke. Sorry. Also needed a ton of water and generally couldn't go up or down hills. But as I said, at the time they were the most efficient way of getting things from point A to point B. Until the railways arrived. I mean, railways had several advantages over canals, mainly that they could go up and down hills, they were slightly easier to build, and also they were quicker. Generally it seemed a good idea to link these two cities with a railway. So in 1823 the Manchester-Liverpool Railway Company was born. However, surveying the railway was actually quite a hard process. The initial survey was done by a man called William James. He did a bit of a botch job because most of his work had to be done in secret because of trespassing laws. This first plan was rejected by Parliament. A second survey was done by George Stephenson. Yes, the same George Stephenson I mentioned in the last video. Now he did a slightly better job, but he wasn't very good at math. Usually his son did the math, his son Robert, but he was away in South America. When that was presented to Parliament, they looked at it and said, well, it's slightly better, but we're still going to reject it. Finally, the engineers John and George Rennie were hired to do the job, and they actually did something else. They worked the political side of things, bringing people who were opposed to the railway on side. And their work paid off. In 1826, the railway was approved by Parliament. With the railway being built, they needed to figure out what they were going to do for motive power. Now, you'd think that steam would be the obvious option. Well, they didn't think it was an obvious option. Steam engines were actually relatively new technology at the time. They also had a major public image problem. The public believed that they constantly exploded and spewed out noxious fumes everywhere. Instead, a tried and tested system of cable haulage was proposed, a little bit like the streetcars in San Francisco. However, this had one major drawback which pretty much killed it off. If there was one fault in the cable haulage system, it would paralyse the entire railway. And with the long distances involved, steam engines actually seemed to be the better option. However, there were several types of steam engine and the company wanted the fastest, most efficient form of steam engine possible. So they called a competition, which today we know as the Rainhill Trials. 10 engineers entered the Rainhill Trials, but only 5 actually turned up on the day. Those included Sans Perel by Timothy Hackworth, Rocket built by George and Robert Stephenson, Novelty built by John Ericsson and John Braithwaite, Perseverance built by Timothy Burstall, and last but not least, Cycloped, which I kid you not, was powered by a horse on a treadmill. It actually did enter the trial. Despite the bookie's favourite Novelty having cutting-edge technology for 1829, Rocket won the competition. The railway finally opened in 1830, but it did not go without a hitch. During the first passenger journey on the railway, many people got out their carriages and walked along the track for a stroll whilst the train was stopped. Today this would seem like madness, but back then they didn't really know better. And as history shows, people tend to be idiots. William Huskinson, the MP for Liverpool, was one of these people. He went for a stroll on the tracks, at which point he saw the Duke of Wellington in one of the carriages. Now he and the Duke of Wellington had a little bit of a political tiff, so he went over to try and make amends. And it went quite well at first. He and the Duke exchanged pleasantries and generally made up for past grievances. That wasn't until Stephenson's rocket was seen speeding along on the other track. People scrambled to get off the track and get back into their carriages, including Huskinson, but Huskinson grabbed onto the door which swung around and threw him back onto the track. He couldn't get off the track in time and Stephenson's rocket ran over his leg, smashing it completely. He looked down at his leg and said, "I have met my death. God forgive me." He was then put in the first carriage, which was disconnected from the rest of the train and taken as fast as they could to Eccles. William Huskinson soon died of his injuries in a vicar's house. But despite this, the Liverpool-Manchester Railway was a runaway success and sparked off what is known as the railway mania. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next week.